Life, wisdom.
I noticed that you have a video entitled Levels of Consciousness, and I think it's a really fascinating topic. Can you just tell us what that video is about?
Okay. Well, to start, there's about 6 videos. Maybe you saw the introductory video on levels of consciousness, because there's a lot of aspects to consciousness. It's quite a complex subject. But I try and introduce the basics to a YouTube audience in order to sort of push the zeitgeist, just to push it out there. Because right now, people aren't very well aware that levels of consciousness are happening. What people see in their daily life is that they know what's going on, and then they're surrounded by all these idiots who really don't have a clue what's going on, and they can't understand why these idiots don't understand what they know. That's the way people think.
Okay, so it's kind of like how everybody thinks that people are stupid, but nobody will admit that they're stupid. It's just everybody else.
Yeah, and where that comes from is that we all sort of live with our own restricted vision of reality. Some people are more restricted than others, but to a certain extent, everybody sees a bit of the truth, and everybody sort of limits that truth with certain myths,
Okay.
And I'll give you a good example. For example, in science, we've talked about the chemical imbalance, and that in psychiatry, they tell you that you've got a mental disorder because of a chemical imbalance, and this is supposed to be science. Meanwhile, there's no science behind that at all.
Right.
So why do so many people believe that? Okay. Well, the big reason is that it just sort of makes sense. Like, shouldn't it be biological? Shouldn't any illness or disorder that we have be biological? Because if it's not biological, what is it?
Right.
See? And that's something that people feel very uncomfortable with. They don't like the mystery into things. They don't like to say, you know what, we don't really know.
Right.
No, nobody likes that. And so we tend to fill the gaps with myth. Okay. But going back to consciousness, how it works is there's this guy I've been studying for a number of years. His name's Ken Wilber. And he has been the one who sort of studied other people who are studying consciousness and then sort of synthesizing the information and bringing it all together. Okay, so not everybody agrees with Ken Wilber and his ideas, but he has done his work based on the research of many other people in the field, like Dr. Claire Graves and Don Beck, who came up with a theory called spiral dynamics. And Wilber borrows a lot from this theory, spiral dynamics, and then expands on it, looking at different aspects of how consciousness expands in really all areas of life. Okay. But to keep things simple, I'd just like to share with you the different levels of consciousness that are in the spiral dynamics model, and then that can give you an idea of how consciousness grows with everybody.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, sure.
I'll go ahead. Okay. So basically, at the beginning of time, at the beginning of humanity, and at the time that we're born, we both were sort of in the same place. When you come out into the world, you're only thinking about survival. That's it. And you really don't understand how reality functions at all. You're just sort of immersed into this world, and you even have trouble with how objects relate to each other. This is why, for example, the game Peekaboo is so much fun for a baby, because they just find this incredible. This is an amazing thing. Right. But, if you've also spent time with babies, and as cute and adorable as they are, if you're really looking at a baby objectively, they are the most selfish people you'll ever meet in your life. They're crying at 4 a.m. because they're hungry. They don't care if you're tired, Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. They go poo-poo in the pants, even though it's very inconvenient for you. They don't care, right? Selfish people, babies.
Right. Yes, very selfish.
It's a good thing that they're cute. And basically, that's because they have a level of consciousness that's just focused on their survival, and that's it. And that's where we all start. And they call that the archaic level of consciousness. Okay. And at least based on the anthropology, it seems like we have that level of consciousness in our early ancestors, who would be foraging in the forest in survival clans of 6 people, and no more than that, because they don't have the organizational skills to create a tribe. So they just be out there in sixes, more or less.
Okay.
And when you look at children tend to group in friendship clans of like sixes when they're very young.
Right.
That's sort of a common group of friends to have.
Right.
So yeah, like I said, it's all about survival. There's not much else going on. People with Alzheimer's can have this level of consciousness because the brain damage has done that to them.
Mm-hmm.
And other serious mental disordered people can have that. But when it's really about, it's a pre-verbal level of consciousness, there's no conversation going on in your mind. That's how primitive it is. Right. Now, after thousands of years of development, and once we get into like the age of 1.5 to 3 years old, we get into what's called magical thinking, which is best represented by tribal consciousness or tribes that have had no cross-cultural contact. So, for example, the first tribes which were contacted in New Guinea or in the Amazon, these people would think in very similar ways. And the way they would think is they don't really have a defense between their conscious mind and their unconscious. So everything in the unconscious is like out here in a supernatural reality. Okay. And because of that, they have a great, we'll call respect, but often it manifests itself in fear of spirits. And everything is caused by the spirits. You really don't have much of a role in what happens to you in your life. There's a sense of a powerlessness in things. In order to get power, you need to perform rituals. And those rituals are given by your ancestors. And they can bring good stuff. But if the rituals go wrong, bad things can happen. And that's the black magic or the dark magic side. So the focus of tribal culture is very much about pleasing the spirits because they feel like the spirits are in their hands. Okay.
Right.
Now, you've got a greater organizational situation. It's better. But obviously, there's still a long way to go. And there are things in tribal life that people today don't like to look at, honestly, because we tend to want to see tribes in a sort of rose-colored glasses today. Like in a very, tribal life was so perfect, tribal life was so ideal. But we don't look at the dark side of what goes on. Things like infanticide, like if you think your child is possessed by an evil spirit, then the shaman in the tribe might kill the child because they're possessed. Or if you're, if you have twins, in some tribes, twins are seen as evil. And in some cases, because only animals give birth to twins, so twins were given birth by animals. Like it was an animal that had sex with the mother, and that's why twins came, so they need to be killed.
Oh my.
Things like this, yeah. It's a side of life that, especially postmodern society that I'll get into, they don't want to look at. Okay.
Can you give another example? It was really helpful when you gave the example of the kid playing peekaboo.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of this as being the imagination of the kids and how kids are real imaginative. That's kind of this phase where they don't have an understanding of anything, so they just think everything is magic.
Yeah, they're in a wow. They're sort of in a sense of wonder, and you see that spontaneous wonder. And Wilbur does call that too. He calls it the trailing clouds of glory. We see a real spark in very young children that does fade out, and too often we think that it's our mistake. That if only they had kept that brilliant spark, instead of turning into the, I hate school kind of kid,
Right.
But we see it, around the world in all cultures that there's this sort of brilliant spark and a sense of wonder that starts to fade, And then another practical example, once kids are reaching into that magical consciousness that we see in tribal cultures, they have this natural attraction to magic, Harry Potter. Potter, no child is going to be skeptical about magic and go, you know what? I don't think that this is magic. I think, this is some sort of trick,
Right. Right.
No kid says, you know what, Dad? I don't believe in Santa Claus. It just doesn't make sense to me. They're not there yet. They're going to go, Santa, really? That's amazing. They're going to believe everything.
What if we don't have
say.
a chimney?
Yeah, they don't think about that. It doesn't matter. You're sort of in a magical world, and the tribes are in a magical world. But the part that we forget is that there's a dark side of that too. this dark side.
Okay, so the tribal sense is kind of the, I liked your, kind of thinking about it in terms of kids and this kind of endless imagination that they would have, and everything seems magical. So, okay, so we talked about the first level, we talked about the second level. What's the third? Well,
the third level, you're going to see the first signs of it in children that are like the terrible twos or 3-4-year-olds, where they start saying no. Because that's really the birth of the ego.
Okay.
That's a voice that's saying, the independent ego, it's coming. And it's like, this is who I am and this is what I want, and I don't care what you think, And when you look at early civilizations like the Romans, the Greeks, Egyptian civilization, they all have this real, like, life is about power and respect. And I want to get power, and if I need to get power from taking it from you, that's what I'm going to do. It's not a moral world. These people do not live in a moral world. What they want is they want to be on top. Yeah, and so you see aspects of this feudal culture. That's what I call feudal culture, because there's a lot of fighting in that culture. You see it today. You hear it in rap lyrics, for example, like that lyrics from someone like 50 Cent, back before he became the conservative guy, because now 50 Cent's quite the businessman. And I'll talk about that in a second, But, back when he first broke out, he was like, you can't get $1 out of me because I'm a motherfucking PIMP, this kind of thing, you like my style, you like the way I walk, you like the way I talk, but you ain't getting nothing, because I'm here and you're here, right? But what's my own identity based on? It's what you think of me, right? Like the most important thing for these kind of people is what other people think of them. They've got no sort of internal sense of themselves. But the paradox is that what you want them to think is that, well, I'm the best. This very narcissistic personality.
Inflated sense of ego.
Yeah, we talk about inflated sense of ego, for these kind of people.
Okay.
Prostitutes have the same sort of mentality. And it's very much impulse-driven mentality where I'm just trying to satisfy my pleasures and I don't really care what I need to do to people in order to get what I want. So I'll lie, I'll manipulate. It's part of the game, Don't hate the player, hate the game, baby,
Got it. Okay, all right.
That's feudal consciousness, And you see it around the world in poor areas where there's less education, Really doesn't depend on race. It depends on the kind of education people get, the kind of social situation they're in. You've got it in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro and the favelas of Sao Paulo, where I live. That's there. And if you're going to go into those areas, you need to know how that game is played, because you have to speak their language or you're going to get in trouble, So.
And I think also what kind of is clear is also how difficult it is to survive is going to play a role. Because certainly the more cutthroat, I guess, the situation is, the more people will step up and kind of be cutthroat in order to survive. So.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like you see yourself in this dark reality around you, you adapt yourself to that dark reality, but by doing that, you make the whole reality even darker because you're dark too. You're sort of a scary guy, scary girl. That doesn't help the situation.
Right.
But what you have, and you see it in the favelas of Rio and Sao Paulo, and other cities as well, is you have the next step up, which is churches. And so, for example, in Brazil, where I'm from, in the poorer areas, you see a lot of evangelical type churches where you've got strong authority figures, often, ministers, teachers fit into these roles, and parents as well, where people are starting to learn that life is not just about their impulses. They start to learn that their impulses are actually quite bad, and what their authority figures want is good. And so then the game changes. Instead of being about, I'm going to get what I want, it's I want to play my role in society. I want to follow the rules. I want to fulfill the obligations, even if I don't feel like doing it. I'm going to go to church on Sunday, that kind of thing. And you learn to conform. You learn to conform. There's a new show on HBO, and it's called Eastbound and Down. I don't know if you've heard of this show.
No.
It's about a former drug-addicted baseball player who finds the love of his life, but to become what his wife wants him to be, he has to give up baseball, give up drugs, start going to church, take a job at a car rental place, and learn to be a nice person, you know. And the comedy part is it's driving him crazy, and he's not always a nice person. He's actually quite a sociopath. That's sort of what's going on. So he keeps having these relapses. He'll have a moment of traditional conformist consciousness, and then he just sort of, screw that, and then he goes back to the drugs and causing havoc in people's lives, you know.
So is one of the maybe kind of like hallmarks of this level that this is not behavior that's coming from within you. This is something that there's an external
absolutely
effect, an external kind of force that's causing you to change your behavior.
Yeah, as opposed to feudal consciousness, where there's a lot of fighting. In traditional consciousness, you're learning that the authority figures in your life are good, and what they are saying is good, and basically what you want to do is bad. Okay. And so that's the beginning of morality, and that's really where you have, you know, Christianity coming in, Judaism, and the monotheistic faith, Islam as well. It's all about that, you know. If you look at the gods of the feudal peoples, the earlier civilizations, it's all power gods. When you look at the Greek gods and Zeus and Apollo and these kind of people, Greeks, I get them mixed up. The Egyptian gods, they're all about, this is the god of a particular power, you know, and those are the gods that feudal people go for. But now in the conformist level, we've got a monotheistic God. He's much more just. It's good and bad, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay, so traditional was I guess that number 4?
Yeah.
And so now we're on to number 5. What is number 5?
Yeah. Number 5 would be modern consciousness. And that is a person who is starting to think more independently and rationally. You know, it's when, you know, you're at church that one day and then all of a sudden you're thinking, you know, I'm not sure I agree with what the minister or the priest is saying. You know, you're going to school and you're thinking, well, my teacher is saying one thing, but they act completely differently. You know, you're starting to question authority and you're starting to think rationally for yourself.
Is this also where we start to go, hey, wait a second. When I actually look at the scientific articles and actually look at the journals, all of these claims of a chemical imbalance aren't really backed up by the science.
No, it's not.
You kind of start questioning.
No, it's not.
We're not quite there yet.
No, we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
And the reason is that in this idea, we're divorcing ourselves, or this idea of modern consciousness, we're sort of steering away from anything that's irrational. And we're looking for what's measurable, okay? So our world is based around scientific facts, okay?
Okay.
And what's real and what you can see. So, for example, atheism is something you'll see at the modern level of consciousness, although not in everybody. In many cases, people maintain their religions, but it sort of just goes into the background, and they use them when it's essential. For example, somebody dies, you know, there's a primal need for ceremony around something like that, so they'll use it at that time. But, you know, for the most part, people are more concerned with material success, you know. Okay. And the reality is defined by science. There's an idea that science can explain everything. It's maybe one of the central myths of modern thinking is that science can explain everything. So when you get something where science cannot explain everything, it doesn't matter. We still act like science can explain everything.
Okay.
So the idea of the chemical imbalance comes from modern consciousness, okay? In conformist consciousness, what the mental disorder was from was an evil spirit. See, religious people will think that if you've got some sort of mental disorder, it's because somewhere along the line you did something wrong. You either did a ritual by accident or the wrong way, or you committed a sin. You did something. And you probably need an exorcism, for example. You know, exorcisms are still quite common in Brazil and in the South. They don't work, but they happen, and people often find them quite traumatic. You know, it's not a pleasant experience to be told that you have a demon inside of you, you know. Right. But once you move to modern, you've got this sort of chemical imbalance mentality. You've got the production of the drugs and all that stuff. And they do serve a purpose in that they can get you back to normal in the short term, and we didn't have those before. Mm-hmm. So there is a limited benefit there, but it's still not the whole picture.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so is that... I keep losing track of how many levels we're at. Is that all
This
of
is
them?
level 5, modern. It's very materialist oriented in that it interprets the whole world in a materialist, sort of superstitious kind of way. It's only looking for what can be measured and using science as a reference. But sometimes it falls into scientism, which is the belief that science can explain everything. And that's where the chemical imbalance myth came from.
Okay. So I guess what would be, we've kind of discussed is that all of the levels then?
No, there's 2 more.
There's 2 more, okay.
Yeah, the number 6 we'll call the postmodern level of consciousness. And I think that many of the videos that you share here on Psychetruth are definitely from a postmodern perspective, in that the first thing you see with postmodernity is a sharp criticism of modern culture. Okay?
That's awesome.
So you're criticizing, the kind of food that we're eating, the drugs that we're putting in our body, our lifestyles, the way we're living, consumerism.
Water fluoridation.
Yeah. Whatever. There was a website called whatever it is, we're against it. That's a sort of a postmodern mentality to a certain extent. But there's also a greater compassion at this level for different ways of seeing things, for different cultures, There's a greater love of travel and diversity. Diversity is a big word for postmodern people. They love diversity. And the reason is that this is the first time that people can see the world from multiple perspectives. Like, I can take in your opinion or the opinion from someone in India and Africa and actually weigh it in my heart as being equal to my own. And in many cases, almost always better than my own, because I'm a white man and white men have, ruined the world, right? So
that's what they want us to think, isn't it?
Well, we sort of wind up turning everything upside down. It's that everything that we used to think was good has become bad, And so postmodernity really criticizes modern life and traditional life as well. But it doesn't show very much compassion sometimes. It really only sees the negative, So when postmodern people look at for example, modern society, and they start to criticize modern society, they forget that the criticism that they're doing is taking place on cameras and technology that was made by modern consciousness.
It's
in a
true.
House that was made by modern consciousness.
Very true.
So we wouldn't be here without the incredible technological achievements of modern society. Guys like Thomas Edison and things like that. But we forget that because the moment you move forward to a new level, you really start to look at the previous level you're at like you made a big mistake. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I used to think like that. Like, oh, I was so stupid, And then when you have these shifts in consciousness, you have a whole new value system, and you often have new friends, new jobs, new relationships, and in my case, a whole new country, Yeah, so I would say that's a lot about postmodern, multiple perspective, diversity, multiculturalism, anti-everything other than that, anti-capitalism.
Right.
Yeah, and anti-religion, because racism, homophobia, sexism, these are all postmodern concerns that people at lower level of consciousness, lower levels, they don't really care about,
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we just have one more level then. Yeah.
And in my videos, I refer to it as the power of now level, okay? In Ken Wilber's work, he's referred to it more as the integral level of consciousness. But I think the cool thing about this level is that it can see the value of each of these previous levels, that there are things in those levels that are very important. For example, in traditional consciousness, we're learning about morality, which we didn't have before, At feudal level, we're learning about independence and being your own person,
Standing up for what you want.
Yeah, standing up for what you want, even if you're selfish about it, but at least you can stand up. Mm-hmm. Some people, they can't even stand up.
And sometimes if we aren't selfish and we don't speak up for what we want, then you'll never get it. So you got to have, you're right, you got to have a happy balance of those different things.
Yeah, and one point they make from the sort of power now integral perspective is that there is a time and a place for all the levels of consciousness, and that some are better suited to certain jobs or moments in life than others, you know. So, for example, businesses are best run with a modern thinking because postmodern people are so busy talking to each other about the diverse perspectives that they could attack a problem that they rarely get things done. Postmodern people are not very efficient when it comes to running a business the way modern people are, you know.
Because they're always questioning things and doubting things.
And discussion. Like, postmodern loves dialogue, and it's great, but it doesn't lead to a lot of work efficiency, you know.
Okay.
And then at integral, there is not only being able to see the value of that hierarchy, but being able to see the strengths and weaknesses, and being able to trust your own intuition in a way that modern people don't exist. You know, traditional people are following the authority figures. Modern people are following rational thinking. And then postmodern people are really not trusting themselves at all. They're really listening to everybody else. And then here we've got this level where people can say, you know what? I know it sounds crazy, but I think I'm going to go and do this. And everybody can say, oh, you're mad, you're insane, what are you doing? But there's a stronger cultivation of the intuition there that most people think doesn't even exist. But I do, and I think it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously it would just, I guess, maybe be an estimate or maybe based on some of the other research that you've read, but how does it kind of span out over the population? Are, you know, most people,
Good
kind of
question.
on one end, most people kind of on the other? Like, how does it break down?
Yeah. The early levels, like, for example, tribal societies have almost been entirely wiped out on the planet because of modern society, which is not a good thing, but that shows how the levels interact. Modern or tribal consciousness and down, like I said, small children, but in terms of it being in adults, we're talking about probably less than 5 or 6% of the population. Mm-hmm. Feudal societies, 15 to 20%. Conformist societies, which would be the religious societies, like 30%. Modern society, about 30 or 40%. And then postmodern, like 20. And then integral, maybe by now, maybe at the most 5%.
Okay.
Yeah, back in 1999, when Beck did his book on spiral dynamics, he listed integral as being 1%, you know. Wow. And I should point out, though, that, you know, a lot of people have said, well, this just puts these people on the top and they must think that they're the best. It's not really about that. It's about a widening of compassion, a widening of understanding for where people are at and understanding how to communicate with them depending on the way they think, you know, and with the understanding that there are other levels to come that we will continue developing, you know, in the future. So it's not like integral's thinking, oh, integral knows everything. No, it's like we think we see as much as we can see, but that doesn't mean we're not going to be able to see more tomorrow, you know, or a decade from now.
Right.
Okay.
And so, you know, in terms of taking this, you know, really cool understanding, this really cool kind of way of thinking about it, and then applying it into your life, I guess, maybe you can just give your personal experience. How have you been able to kind of, you know, maybe observe the levels of consciousness or even apply what you know or understand now about that in your daily life?
Well, to start, you don't fight nearly as much, okay? Because, for example, postmodern people will sit down with you, and if you disagree with them about pretty much anything, they will keep coming back to you with dialogue, trying to turn your opinion. And if you continue to disagree with a postmodern person, they get hurt. They really can get hurt. And they can judge you in a very harsh way. They can think, like I said, you're a racist, you're sexist, you're homophobic, you know, and all those things exist, and they're not good things, okay? Right. I'm not saying these things are great. But you also have to have a little bit of compassion for where that person is at. So, for example, my grandparents, they were racist, okay? And I think a lot of grandparents were racist. Okay, My father was not allowed to marry my mother because she was Catholic. Okay, that was how it went down. They ignored them. They still didn't go to the wedding though. Okay, so there was a lot of racism there. And in that case, bigotry, I guess you would say. Catholic Protestant. You know, it wasn't like Catholic Christian Islam. No, Catholic Protestant.
Yeah, but there's still that divide.
Yeah, and that was the 60s. You know, that was the 60s, and that was the way it was. Did I love my grandparents? Yes, I love my grandparents, even if they were racist. And I'm sure they were sexist and homophobic too. And I don't talk to them about these issues and keep pressing them because they're not going to change. Okay? I just respect it. Now, there are moments you can see when a person's becoming an open door, when they're starting to be frustrated in life, when they're starting to ask questions about the reality they see in front of them, questioning their own religion, questioning the meaning of their job. You know, a person questioning the meaning of their job is a person at a modern level of consciousness who's going through an existential crisis. What is the point of doing what I'm doing? Okay, that's the kind of person you want to take to the next level. You want to introduce them to postmodern ideas. You don't want to take them to integral ideas because the integral ideas are too advanced. You show them postmodern thinking. You know, you show a religious person modern thinking. You show a modern person postmodern thinking. You show a feudal person religious thinking. You know, I have many kids who write me, you know, kids doing lots of drugs and they've got mental disorders. And I say, have you ever been to church? I say, pick one, go. You know, I don't go to church, but I know that for a certain kind of person, going to church would be a very good thing.
Right.
Because they haven't developed any morality, you know. So you've got this structured sequence of development, and they see it all around the world, and that's what I think is so interesting, you know.
Right. Well, Sean, thank you so very much. This has been an enlightening discussion. I will definitely, we'll definitely kind of expand on this in future videos.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope that you will leave us a thumbs up and a comment if you have future video requests or questions for us. In the meantime, you can click up here to subscribe to Sean's channel or to our channel. I'm Psychetruth correspondent Karina Rachel, and I want to thank you for watching.